I've been a software engineer for over 5 years. I've worked at big tech, I've worked in high frequency trading, and most recently as a senior engineer at a Series B AI startup. When I first heard about no-code platforms like make.com and n8n, I thought they were complete jokes. I thought there'd be no way they could help me since my technical skills were already so advanced. Well, today I'm happy to report that I was extremely wrong about this take, and I wanted to share with you guys exactly why. Welcome back to Tommy Codes. Let's get into the video. So if you're not familiar with these no-code automation platforms, they basically allow you to connect a lot of different apps like Google Sheets, Gmail, Airtable, et cetera, very easily with drag and drop clickable modules. And I think the best way to explain this is really just go over a quick example. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna build out a workflow. And if you take a look at my screen, I've got this dummy Google Sheet for us called customer information. And as you can see here, it's just got one column, name. And what I wanna have happen is anytime I add a name to this list, so let's do Tommy, I want me to receive an email notifying me that a name was added to my spreadsheet. And we'll be using my own email, which is Gmail. And as you can tell, this is a pretty simple workflow, like very easy to explain just in a few sentences. But if you've worked with these APIs before, you know that this is not necessarily the easiest thing to sit down and write, even with the help of AI. So what I'm gonna do today is actually build this out live in n8n. And then we're gonna talk about how much more difficult it would have been to do using API calls in Python, Node.js, et cetera. And then I'm gonna talk about why this is so powerful, especially for developers or people that already have a lot of technical skills. So let's get into n8n. I know I mentioned make.com, but n8n is the much more advanced developer-friendly one, and you can actually self-host it. Right now, I'm just on the n8n cloud-hosted free trial, but I'm gonna make a video later explaining how you can self-host this and why you might wanna do so. But regardless, we're at a workflow here, and we have to add a first step. And the first thing we want to do is look for a module for Google Sheets. So let's look at Sheets in here, and we can see that Google Sheets pops right up. Now, if we go here, what we're going to really look for here is a trigger, because I mentioned that anytime a row gets added to the spreadsheet, I want the trigger to fire. So let's go ahead and look at on-row added trigger. And then what we're going to do here is we have to create a credential. We need to connect n8n, which is some cloud app, to my Google Sheets, which is another cloud app. So let's go ahead and do that. And as you can see here, you get this nice just sign in with Google button. So let's click sign in. That's gonna bring us over here. I'm gonna sign into my account, and you do need to give it pretty open access if you want it to be reading and writing from your Google Drive. So just keep that in mind, but we're gonna go ahead and hit continue. Now the connection is successful. If we go over here, we can see that I'm now connected to Google Sheets. So we can get out of that. And now we can look for the settings. So what's gonna happen is n8n is gonna pull Google Sheets, a particular spreadsheet, and I guess we'll just do it every minute. I think that's gonna be easiest. And the document that we're gonna look for is gonna be this customer information document. And the sheets, that's gonna be just sheet 1. And we're gonna say on row added. So let's fetch the test event. And now let's go over here and actually add a row. So let's add test row. And we'll go over back into n8n. And okay, so it looks like it picked up the first 2 rows from the spreadsheet. So we'll consider that a win. We're gonna start here. And with n8n, on the left-hand side of this node, you've got the inputs, and on the right-hand side, you've got the outputs. We can see that we got it in a table or a JSON, or we can even see the schema over here. And once we have that, the output of this node can now be used as the input of another node. And the node that we're gonna use is Gmail. So let's look for Gmail. We got Gmail here, and I wanna send a message. So let's look for send a message. And again, we're gonna need to log in. So this is gonna be create new credential, sign in with Google, go over here, signing into my account here, select all. And so now I'm giving n8n access to my Gmail basically. Now we go over here, account connected, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna send a message. So the 2 is going to be my own email, and we're gonna say new customer. And then we want the name of the customer to pop up here. And so what we can do here is actually drag in the name. And now you'll notice that we have this bracket syntax, and that is what is enabling us to use the previous node's output as an input for this current node. And so we can see here that the result is gonna be new customer Mike, and then the message is gonna be, hello, there is a new customer. Here is their name. And then you can just bring this name back in here again. And as we can see here again, down in the results, we're gonna see that it turns out to Mike, even though in the message itself, you get this JSON syntax, which should be very familiar if you're already a programmer. Okay, anyway, and there's a bunch of options here like, BCC, CC, attachments, all this kind of stuff that maybe if you have a more fancy workflow, you'd actually need to use, but we really don't. Now we can hit test step. That is going to execute the node. And if we look here, it looks like it worked. Let's go over to my email, refresh, and there we go, new customer Jim over here. And if we look down here, we actually get a note that it was sent automatically with n8n. And we also see here, new customer Mike. So we just got that email. That's very nice. Okay, cool. Now, if we look at this workflow, it's only 2 nodes. Why don't we go and hit test workflow? So now test workflow is gonna sit here and pull Google Sheets, and it looks like it just picked up those last 2 rows. Okay, so it found all 4 items in the list, and if we go back over to my email, we're gonna notice that if we refresh, I have the 4 emails here. Now let's go back over to the workflow. Let's hit test again, and I actually wanna go in and maybe add a new row. Okay, so we're having some issues adding the row. This is a very simple n8n workflow, literally just 2 nodes, and I built this with you here in about 5 minutes. Now let's talk about what would you need to do if you weren't allowed to use n8n? What would you have to do to set up an automation like this if you were just using straight up code, even AI assisted code? Well, let's take a look at the API for Google Sheets. Here is the API for Google Sheets. I am in the documentation. And if we take a look here, okay, read and write cell values, update spreadsheet. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, Google Sheets is a very fully fledged product, and there's a lot of functionality. And not to mention that, but authenticating is gonna be a lot more annoying with any of your custom apps versus n8n. But anyway, let's just like look around here, and we have, okay, add sheet request, add named range request. We've got some kind of tutorial that they posted, which is helpful. So this is a little overwhelming. And even if you know really well how to code, like even if you're a professional developer who's like one of the best programmers in the world, you're still gonna have to sit down and read through this, or at least prompt some AI to generate some code. Like, why don't we actually go and let's find, I don't know, let's find some example code. So they give you some example code here to create a spreadsheet. We have Node.js, and it's not that complicated. If you've been a programmer for a while, you could sit down and figure this out, but you probably don't want to. There's just a lot of stuff going on. You need to give it the URL, et cetera, et cetera. The thing is though, if you want to use this API with your own app, you are gonna have to give it access to your Google account. And as you saw in n8n, I just hit sign in with Google. I click one button and I'm already authenticated. If you have a custom app, what you need to do is actually go in either an API key or some sort of OAuth 2 callback. And depending on your needs, that's not the easiest thing to do, honestly. Even if you have developed a lot of apps before, this specific thing might take you an hour because it's very finicky. I've done it before. And just to prove that Google Sheets is not the only Google API that's kind of a pain in the ass, let's go over to the Gmail API, and it almost looks worse. So we see, okay, authentication, scopes. We have to define a bunch of scopes. So again, I mentioned like the authentication really is annoying here. What else do we got? Create drafts. I mean, just look at how much Java code there is to create a simple draft in Gmail. I think what's so frustrating about working with these APIs is that describing the program that you want, the behavior of the program that you want in English can usually be done in 1 or 2 sentences. I want a workflow that sends me an email every time a row gets added to a Google Sheet. But that's gonna take you hundreds of lines of code and potentially hours prompting AI or reading through documentation just to get the exact same thing. And believe me, I don't wanna sit down and implement this in Python for you guys because I think it's gonna take way too long and just be a waste of my time. But hopefully just looking through the documentation, you can see why this is so annoying. Let's talk about another problem though, the hosting and deployment. If I had this workflow that was pulling Google Sheets every minute and looking for new rows, where would I deploy that? Well, maybe you could deploy it as like a Lambda function in AWS or something similar in a different cloud. Maybe you could spin up your own VPS and set up a cron job. Maybe that's the most hardcore way to do it, but that's a lot of work. And if you're building this out for somebody, or if you're building it out for a sales team or potentially a client, you don't want to have to deal with that entire process. You don't want to have to get the cloud involved. It's nice to just have something that's already hosted, has cron jobs working, has all these triggers working, and you don't have to think about any of that. And I know if you're a developer, you're probably thinking, well, you know, if I self-host, it can handle more load and it's more reliable and I get more control and I don't have to deal with this stuff. And you're 100% right, but you also have to think about the scale and the type of automation that you're actually trying to build. If you're trying to build out a fully fledged application, you probably do want and need that level of control. You want to be in control of the VPS. You want to have full control over everything that's going on in your automation. But if it's something that's really low frequency, like you're adding rows to the spreadsheet every few days or even 10 times a day, like you don't need to worry about scale that much. And honestly, what you really want is something that's convenient so that you'll even implement the automation in the first place. And that's what I really like about these platforms, in particular n8n, is it enables you to write programs that before were way too expensive in terms of time and effort. But these things can really make your life a lot easier. They can manage. The fact that they connect to all your apps also makes them a lot more useful for non-programmers. People that previously had a lot of issues with manually clicking around and just frustrations with technology now finally have access to automations at scale, and automations that connect their apps and their workflows that don't just live in, an IDE or a single program. That alone makes this program really, really useful. Now, I want to talk about why I actually changed my mind and I guess why I had this opinion in the first place. And I think it's just as a programmer, this is my craft. I've spent years of my life becoming really competent at a lot of different languages, learning all of the most complicated stuff. And I feel like I'm proud of that. Of course I'm proud of that. That's taken me a lot of time and effort, and it's not easy to do. It's not easy to become really, really good at Python and understand how to deploy technology onto AWS, understand how Kubernetes works. Any of these things is going to take you a lot of time. And when you see a platform like this enable you to accomplish the same end goal without all of that work, I think it really hits your ego a little bit, and it starts to make you question if what you're doing is even valuable. And I totally get that mindset. It's one that I had before. But once I actually sat down and started to use these programs like n8n and make.com, I think my attitude really started to shift. And the reason that it started to shift is that these platforms, while they can be used by people who don't really have technical backgrounds or aren't super good programmers, if you have a technical background, if you still understand the underlying technology, and if you just really have a good understanding of programming concepts, these platforms are way more powerful for you than they are for somebody with limited experience, because all of that knowledge still plays. Like ultimately, this is still programming, clicking around on the screen and dragging modules, but the difference is this is a lot easier. So you still have to learn some sort of programming to be able to use a tool like this. And to be honest, n8n is not that easy to use. But if you're a programmer, you probably can use this without ever reading a manual or even watching a tutorial. Like you could probably sit down and get something working. It's not that complicated, because really what it is just a better interface for building out simple little scripts and a better way to host them that makes it a lot easier to share. I think that's really what caused me to change my mind. And also, like, just in the stuff that I do day to day, there are a lot of these things that I wish I could automate, but I'm unable to because I don't want to sit down and fight with the Gmail API for 6 hours, even with AI assistance. And the other thing, if you watched this channel before, you know that I've done a lot of videos on MCP and clients and servers and all that. Well, this functionality with AI, we only briefly touched on the AI part of it, but you can build an agent out just like that. And I know what you're thinking, like, this isn't really an agent, like, really, what is this gonna do? But you can add different models, so it's this easy to connect it to any model. And I made a video before about Light LLM, which is a LLM proxy server that makes the connection game a lot easier between different models. But just look at what we have here in the n8n dashboard. We can just select any model we want. We don't have to deal with lower level API calls. They're gonna handle all of that for you. So we can hook it up to, I don't know, Anthropic, and we can see your credential. You just put in your API key and you're good to go. And you get a drop down with the different models, and you have access to all of the data. And in terms of agents, like, you can just add the tools right here. And even now they've added MCP, which means all that work I did before, setting up a full MCP front end and walking you guys through how all that works, you don't really need to know that in order to use it. Although, of course, I still recommend knowing the fundamentals. But you can add an MCP server directly to an n8n workflow, and now it's something that people can use even if they're not that technical. And I really think that's an amazing thing. And I think what's going to happen with these no-code tools is we're going to be able to start building software that before was way too expensive. And I don't see this as necessarily a threat to software engineering. I see this as just another tool that you should have access to and understand how to use. It's really good for prototyping. Like, you could almost build out an entire application that has just like an AI generated front end, and then the back end is 100% n8n. That's good enough for a prototype. Now, obviously at some point, if scale starts to get crazy, or if you really want that fine grained control, maybe latency becomes a problem, you probably do want to sit down and actually just code out one of these workflows and make it optimized, think about deployments. But if you're just trying to figure out if an idea is good or bad, I highly recommend just using a platform like this. I don't think you'll regret it, and I think it'll save you a lot of time. Let me know in the comments if you had a similar opinion to me, if you thought these tools were stupid and were a complete waste of time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.